Welcome, teachers, to the 2017-2018 school year. I've had the pleasure of working with some of you teachers already getting Seesaw ready for your classrooms. So I wanted to make a quick video recording talking about how you can prepare to start using Seesaw with your students and with your parents in your classrooms. So first of all, we're going to get started with when you build your class for the new year, you should have archived all your last year's classes and just archived them instead of deleting them. But then when you go to build your new class, you need to make sure that you are doing a few things to get started. Okay, let's jump right into a class and start talking about what the beginning of your year should look like with Seesaw and a couple of things that you have to do before you get started. So first of all, in your Seesaw class, please note there's been a few changes, and so it's going to look just a little bit different, but not enough that it should throw you off. So first of all, your tools for your class now are over here in this range. You should, as I mentioned, you should have archived your old classes. I use all of these, so I have not archived them yet, but this is where you find your classes. And we'll go through some of the new things as we talk about these different tools and options here. But first of all, you should always go through when you create a new class, and you create it right here, when you set this up, it is important from now on to start adding the school year to the end of your class. So for instance, you're going to type in your class name, and then you're going to type in the school year, because at the end of the year, you should be archiving classes, not deleting them. And so when you start archiving multiple classes, to have the date tied to them is important, so you know which ones are which. Okay, and so then when you choose your class level, this is also going to choose different types of settings, such as how the kids join and what the icons look like. So if you choose any one of these at the top, it's going to have you join via QR code with shared devices. And it's also going to give you the cutesy little animal icons for each kid. As you get down to the the upper grades, it's going to give you more the email option to sign up. So I'm just going to select other, and I'll show you what that looks like here. As soon as you do that, it's going to tell you your students will sign in with a QR code, and that's how it's set. But down here you can change it where they can sign in using an email sign-in instead, and you can always go in and change that later too. So I'm going to select email just to show you the difference. So I'm going to select email. Okay, so now you have your new class built. And you should have to, didn't take me to enter any students, but since I selected to sign in via email, it didn't have me connect students right away, but I'm going to go in and change that. So if I go up to the wrench, I'm going to say, that's not it. Seems slow down here. Under students, the sign-in mode, if I change this to shared devices QR code, and I had originally set it up that way, it would have asked me to get students joined. And so if it doesn't ask you that automatically, I can click right there and add students this way. And so I'm just going to put in different numbers. Each student has to be added on their own line. And so here's my students. I'm just going to put in a few. Remember, you can always go back and add later, or you can add them via list under this link right here if you have them. Oops, sorry about that. I'll show you that list. Right here. So if you have them in a list, you can put them right here. I would suggest only typing in the student's first name and possibly the last initial if you need to. That's just common practice when you're working with digital tools. Okay, so now you have some students in there. So what the important part of this is to always go back and check your settings. And you do that right here in this wrench. So one new thing this year, you can always come in here and change your class name and grade level. But you can now add teachers as collaborators, which you could before, but you can change the theme of the class. And so you can change the color, and you can come in here and you can add an icon. Please know too that you can add your own icons by uploading an image. And so you can change kind of what that class looks like, so you can help decipher between different classes if you have multiple ones. Here's where you change the student sign-in mode. We talked about that before. Here's where you can manage students, add students, or add more names. This is important, these down here, because this is set if you want to allow students to like and comment on other student posts and theirs, you have to have this enabled. If you're not comfortable with that, shut these off and get started with it without having them comment until you've had a chance to talk to them about appropriate comments and digital citizenship and things like that. This one, if you turn this one off, when you accept a post from a student, if you turn this off, the student can only see their own work and what you have posted to everyone. They will not be able to see other students' work. And again, if you feel more comfortable starting with this turned off, that's great, and you can always open it up later so then the students can see other students' posts. And you can use it as a lesson to make sure that they are being good digital citizens as they use this tool. This one I think is very important to leave on. This means that you have to go and accept every post that comes in before it is posted to a journal. To me, this is a great check and balance system for you before it is posted live and goes out to parents. This one, enable item editing, is important because if you want to start assigning assignments to students via Seesaw, if this is turned off, the students cannot use the assignment feature. So basically, if you have this turned on, you post an assignment to students, what they have to do is on that assignment, they have to copy and edit it, and then they make their changes or answer their questions, and then they can post it. If this is turned off, they are not allowed to copy and edit. Automatically now the enable family access is turned off. I highly suggest that you turn that on because this is one of the most powerful features of Seesaw is the communication with family. So if you turn that on, then it gives you all these other options. And this is where you can invite families, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. This is where you can also manage families. So if you have an account in there tied to a student that you no longer want, you can click on that and delete them, and I'll show you that again in a minute. Pending family approvals, as soon as a family requests to join, you have to approve it before they can join. And so this is where you'll get a notification, but if you have ones that are pending yet, you can go in here and find those too. You can turn off and turn on family likes and family sharing. You can turn on or off any of these, just as it works the same as students. Again, if you're more comfortable leaving off to start, that's wonderful. It is a good tool for them to help uplift students, though, as long as they realize that these comments are supposed to be positive and uplifting. New this year is you can blog with your students via Seesaw. So if you turn this on, you will have a blog access for that class. You also have the ability, and we talked about this in the different webinars, where you can add folders to your account. For instance, you can add like a reading or a math folder, a science folder. You can add a color to it. And then when you put items in this folder from different students, you can click on your math folder and you'll see all the math articles within your class. These two I never mess with. I would not turn on save to the camera roll because you're going to get all kinds of pictures in there. And I would not change the video quality because you're really not going to use that feature all the time, and so you don't want it to take up a lot of space. And so those are the options within your class settings that you should look at before you invite anybody to your class. And just by creating these students over here, you have not invited anybody to those classes because the kids have to join first via QR code, the way that this is set up. Okay, so the next thing that I suggest you do is you create a welcome letter for your parents and your students to read as soon as they get on. So I'm going to go to this class here. And this is a sample welcome letter. Basically, it says, welcome to my class. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to connect with you and your child through this tool. And it talks about a few things to remember, and basically all comments should be constructive. Now, if you turn those comment features off, you're not going to have this on there yet until you decide to turn that feature on. Because it talks about making specific comments so that they're not long, they're short, easy to read, and they're to the point. And if you post to everyone, please be aware that the everyone goes to both student and parents. And again, if you turn that off for your parents and your students, you're not going to want to add that in your welcome letter. But definitely make sure you have a welcome letter there. The other thing I suggest you do before you start connecting students and parents is to post your newsletter in there if you create one. Now, my newsletter here was created via Canva, and so I entered it in as a link. So if parents click on this, it takes them out to that Canva account, and they can read the newsletter from there. What I like about this in Seesaw is, number one, it gives this header, and that header will stay the same as long as you recreate the newsletter the same. And so it will pop up, and so parents will know right away and students will know right away that this is a newsletter and it's important to read. Now, I can't guarantee always that your parents and students read the entire newsletter, so if there's something very important that you want to point out, a good rule of thumb is to record your voice highlighting those important parts of the newsletter. And so if the parents don't read the newsletter, at least they can click on the audio and hear your recording.
Welcome back to the 2017-2018 school year.
So get the idea. But I would definitely try to tie an audio with the important features to your newsletters as well. So those two items I would suggest having in before you invite anybody, both the welcome letter and the newsletter. And say, for instance, that you have your newsletter came on the top of the feed instead of the welcome letter, and you want the welcome letter on top. You can always come here to the one that's underneath and say edit date and change the date to that date, or and then once you change the date, like if you put today's date and you say, okay, it's going to, once you refresh the page, it's going to take that item and put it to the top of the feed. Again, I would suggest having your welcome letter on the top and then your newsletter right underneath that. So once you have those two things in your classroom, now you can start adding students and adding parents. And so we're going to talk about that. I know I did that in an earlier webinar, but let's go through it really quick again. So right now this class is set up so that they join via QR code. And so by clicking down here, student code, you can print a poster, and it's going to tell you, it says students will get the Seesaw app, they'll open it up, and they'll say, I'm a student, and they scan the code. Now, this is the poster that you can print out and put in your little Seesaw station, which we'll talk a little bit about later, that gives instructions for the kids on how to join the class. And so you can put that up as a poster and they can join that way. Now, this is if the kids are joining with shared devices. So when they click on this sort of QR code, they're going to have to scan the QR code, and it'll take them into the journal. They create their article for the journal, and then when they do the green check mark, it's going to ask them, which student are you? And then that's where they choose, if they're really young, they'll choose the picture of the cow, or they'll choose the picture of the horse, or whichever one they know they are. Or if they're the older students, they choose their name. Now, I want to show you, we're going to change this mode from shared devices, and we're going to go to email sign-in mode. Okay, so once you do that, you need to go back here and you're going to say reset student and family QR codes, because it's going to give them a different QR code when you change it to the email feature. Okay, so now students can join via code, and see how it changed this information here. And so this is the code that they get to join my class. So the way that students do this via email is they go to app.seesaw.me and they say they're a student, and then it asks to choose an email or Google sign-in. And if they choose the Google, if they choose the email, what they have to do is when they go to this URL, every time they're going to have to enter their email address and their password. If they choose the Google account sign-in, they just click on sign in with Google, and it takes them right into their class. Now, Google account sounds easier, but if your students are using shared devices, say for instance they go into a computer lab to do this, or they use laptops off of a cart, you're going to want to have them join or choose via email, because if a student forgets to log out of the laptop and then another student picks it up, when they say Google account, it's going to take them into the other student's account. So it might be safer to say, okay, log in with your email address and password in that instance. But if they have one-to-one devices or devices that they use strictly amongst themselves, then it's very easy for them to select Google account because they're already signed into their device, and they click sign in with Google and it takes them right in. Now, that you can have them sign up with this on the board, or you can click on email students, and if they're a brand new user to Seesaw, you copy this and send it out to them, and they can click on this link, copy and paste this code in, and they're in your class. If they've used Seesaw before, it's a little bit different just because they've already been on Seesaw, so that instead of creating the new account, they just say they want to join to another class, put in this code, and then they're in. So that's how you get students to join. And let's look at how we invite families. You can do that from here if you want, or you can now click down here. And there's two options when you get parents to join. If you have a younger class where they are joining via QR code, I would suggest always to print the paper copy invites first, and then follow up with the parents that with a sample email. I'm going to go back to my class here and change this back to the QR code just to show you how that prints out. And notice I didn't save that or change it. So I want to make sure that I reset the codes. And I think you don't always have to do that because it should automatically do that. But if you reset the codes, then you're making sure that each student gets their specific code. So when I go to invite families and I say print paper invites, it's going to give you a printable copy that you print out and send home with each student. At the top are your instructions on what you should do. It will tell you who already has a parent connected. And then as you scroll down, each student has their own sheet. For instance, here's ES's, which is a student. So you're going to send this paper home with ES, and their parents are going to scan this QR code or go to this URL, and they will be in ES's student journal. So if you look down, here's a different student journal. So you send that one home with that student. Here's another student's journal, and you send that home with that student for their parent. So now say for instance you've sent that home a couple times and not getting any responses, so you can come here and get an email invite. So you can copy this email and you can send it to those specific parents that have not yet joined, and send it via email. And hopefully they will join that way. Now, don't panic if you have some parents who refuse to join, because what I've noticed in the past is that eventually they hear from other parents how great and wonderful it is, and other students and their kids starts talking about, why aren't you on my Seesaw account? And eventually they'll come to you and say, how do I get on that Seesaw again? How do I get invited to that? And so I wouldn't panic too much. Just give it some time. Okay, so there is the rundown on how you get started with Seesaw for the year. Again, we showed you a couple new things in Seesaw and that it looks a little bit different. Please be aware that if you are in a classroom where you're going to use maybe one device with all of your kids, it's a good idea, and I mentioned this before, about setting up a Seesaw station where you can print out those posters that we talked about on how to join Seesaw. There's also some great posters on Pinterest, like if you're going to record, here's a poster that'll talk about the settings on how to record and what to do and what kind of voice to speak in. So check out Pinterest for some of those posters and some different ideas on posters that you should post in your Seesaw station. I just pick a small area of the room and set up the station. Now, if your students are going to do some recording, here's a quick little tip for you. If you take a paper box from the office, you take the lid off and you set the box on its side, you now have a mini little recording station, because what the students are going to do when they go to record is they're going to hit the record option and they're going to set the iPad in the back of that paper box. And so what that's going to do is it's going to help pick up that student voice while other things are going on around the room behind them. It's going to pick up their voice a little bit better so you can hear them. And you can just have that in your Seesaw station and go through the rules on how to use that with your class before you begin any sort of projects with them. And also, please be sure to check out different resources and different ways in which other teachers use Seesaw. There's great examples on Pinterest. There's great examples in the Google Plus community. There's great examples that get posted all the time on Facebook. So make sure you check those out. And then I also want to remind you, please, please, please feel free to contact me with any questions or any ideas on using Seesaw, and I'd be glad to come out and help you. I'd be glad to shoot you some ideas through email. And also keep in mind, if you're a little bit jittery about getting your students on, if you just want an extra hand there to do that, I'd also be glad to do that. So, you can contact me at tina.sauser@esu8ne.org. I'd be glad to come out and help you get started with Seesaw. So that's all I have for this Seesaw webinar. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to working